Autumn 2004 in the Czech city of Plzeň was quiet and unremarkable. Life went on as usual, and it seemed that the loudest events were happening somewhere far away, on television screens. But on October 21st, this deceptive calm was shattered. A call came into the dispatch service from a woman, concerned that her 80-year-old neighbor from the Sloveny district had not answered calls or opened the door for a day, even though the lights in her windows were on. A standard ambulance crew was dispatched to the call. Upon arrival, the paramedics found that the apartment's front door was indeed locked from the inside, but gave way if pushed harder. The bolt was not fully closed. Inside, they were met by silence and semi-darkness. In the hallway, they saw the elderly owner of the apartment. The woman lay on the floor unconscious. She was still alive. Her breathing was weak and intermittent. An examination revealed severe head injuries and numerous bruises all over her body. The senior paramedic, a man with many years of experience, immediately understood this was not a fall or a domestic accident. The nature and location of the injuries directly indicated that the woman had been long and methodically beaten. While his colleague tried to stabilize the victim's condition, he radioed the dispatcher and requested a police squad to the address. From that moment, the case transitioned from medical to criminal. Soon, an investigative task force arrived at the scene. First, the forensic experts cordoned off the apartment and began a methodical inspection. What they saw inside defied conventional understanding. This was not just the mess a robber leaves behind, hastily searching for money or valuables. The rooms looked as if a hurricane of blind, inexplicable rage had swept through. An old glass-fronted cabinet was shattered, its contents strewn across the floor. Wardrobes were flung open, clothes and linens torn from shelves. But there was one detail that particularly alarmed the investigators. On the floor, among shards of porcelain and broken furniture, lay family photographs. Someone had not just knocked them off the wall, but had torn each one into tiny pieces with some personal hatred. For experienced police officers, this was a clear signal. The motive for the crime was not profit, but something else, much darker. This suspicion was confirmed when experts finished their inventory. After a thorough inspection, it was revealed that almost nothing valuable was missing from the apartment. The perpetrator had only taken a few old commemorative medals, which were likely dear to the owner as a memory, and the cheapest wristwatch. The level of cruelty shown to the victim and the scale of destruction in the apartment were absolutely disproportionate to the value of what was stolen. The case was losing all criminal logic. The experienced investigator leading the group walked through the ransacked apartment for hours, trying to piece the puzzle together. Something in the perpetrator's modus operandi in this mix of vandalism and minimal theft seemed familiar to him. He returned to headquarters and personally requested a search of the archives for all unsolved attacks on elderly people in the area over the past months. An hour later, 2 folders lay on his desk. Scanning the first pages of the reports, he felt a chill. September 15th, an attack on an 82-year-old man. October 2nd, on a 78-year-old woman. The scenario in both cases was identical in every detail. The same district, the victim an elderly single person, the door forced open in a similar way, and the same senseless, extreme cruelty inside the house. The picture was complete and irreversible. The Plzeň police were not dealing with a series of isolated robberies. They now understood with horror that a serial killer was operating methodically and cold-bloodedly in the quiet city. This realization that a serial killer was operating in the city completely changed the course of the investigation. The seemingly chaotic attacks now had to be fitted into a single system to understand the monster's logic and try to anticipate his next move. And first, the investigators turned to those who could no longer speak. To the victims. On the desk of the head of the investigative team now lay 3 folders, 3 shattered lives. A man, 82 years old. A woman, 78 years old. And the last victim, an 80-year-old woman who was still fighting for her life in the hospital. To understand what connected these people, forensic experts began to delve into their biographies. They were ordinary elderly people who had lived long and quiet lives. The first was a former railway worker who had spent his entire life working in the depot. The second was an elementary school teacher, still remembered by her now grown-up students. The third was a military widow who had dedicated herself to her family. At first glance, they had nothing in common. But when detectives began to study data from social cards and interview neighbors, one crucial detail emerged, the key factor that made them ideal targets. All three lived alone. No children nearby, no relatives capable of protecting them. They were isolated from the world and absolutely defenseless. The next step was to map the crime scenes. And here, a second pattern emerged with frightening clarity. The first attack, committed on September 15th, occurred in the quiet district of Slovenia's private houses, a place where everyone knows each other and a stranger immediately stands out. Investigators stuck the first red pin on the map. Then next to it, a second appeared, the scene of the October 2nd attack, and a third from October 21st. All three pins formed a very dense cluster on the map. It became clear that the perpetrator did not choose addresses randomly across the city. All crimes were committed within a radius of only a few blocks. He purposefully chose this location. This was his hunting ground. Now the police had enough data to create a preliminary psychological profile. Criminalists consolidated all known facts: the social status of the victims, the geography of the attacks, the nature of the cruelty displayed, and the strange absence of a clear motive. A chilling picture emerged. The profile was based on several key conclusions. First, the perpetrator deliberately chooses the most defenseless. Second, robbery is not his primary goal. Rather, it is a cover or simply an impulsive act. Third, he acts serially with short breaks, refining his method. And fourth, he operates in a limited, well-known territory. Based on this, an official working profile was formulated and disseminated to all patrols. The perpetrator is most likely a local resident who derives psychological satisfaction not from theft, but from the act of dominance itself and inflicting pain on elderly people. This working profile was the only lead, but it was a theoretical one, built on conjecture and analysis. For a real breakthrough in the case, the most important thing was missing: a witness. And just when the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end, unexpected news came from the hospital. The third victim, the 80-year-old woman, had regained consciousness. Unlike the first two cases where victims were either discovered too late or failed to survive the first hours after the attack, here there was a chance. A chance to look into the monster's eyes through someone else's. But this chance was fleeting and could vanish at any second. Doctors immediately warned the police. The patient's condition was critical, and any conversation could be her last. There was no time for formalities. The investigator closest to the hospital, receiving an emergency call, immediately went to the scene. The entire weight of the days-long investigation, all the hopes of his colleagues, now rested on his shoulders. His task was simple, and at the same time incredibly difficult: to obtain any, even the most fragmented description of the attacker. Hair color, height, clothing, voice. Any detail could be the key to solving the mystery. In the hospital room, to the monotonous beeping of machines, the investigator approached the bed. The woman struggled to keep her eyes open, but it was clear that she was conscious and understood who was before her. Without losing a second, he asked the main question that had plagued the entire Plzeň police force. Who did this? Can you describe him? According to the interrogation protocol, at that moment the woman tried to say something. Her lips moved, but due to severe jaw injuries, she could not utter a sound. The investigator saw in her eyes a desperate desire to help, but her own body had become her prison. All attempts to get any clear description of the attacker's appearance or clothing failed one after another. The hope that had just appeared was melting before their eyes. The investigator realized he was losing her. He saw consciousness draining from the woman. Then, in a last desperate attempt, he decided to change tactics. Instead of direct questions about appearance, he began to ask general, leading questions, hoping for any sign, nod, or word. Did you know him? Was he alone? Did he say anything? He spoke softly but insistently, trying to break through the veil of pain and medication. And at that moment, gathering the last remnants of her strength, before finally losing consciousness, the woman managed to exhale one single, barely audible word. In the interrogation protocol, it was recorded verbatim. Szkoła, school. A few hours later, without regaining consciousness, she passed away. This word became her last testimony and the only clue the police had. And it became the only real clue in the entire case. When this information was transmitted to the investigation headquarters, it had the effect of a bombshell. The vector of searches, which until then had chaotically darted between different versions, turned 180 degrees. The main theory about a gang of drug addicts or recidivists robbing old people for a fix was immediately dismissed. It explained neither the irrational cruelty nor especially this strange dying word. Now the investigation had a new, soul-working version which henceforth determined all their further actions. The perpetrators are teenagers, somehow connected with a school, and the police began to act. A large-scale operation was launched to completely check all educational institutions in the Sloveny district where the attacks occurred, and in the adjacent residential area of Bori, from where, it was assumed, the criminals might have come. The work was colossal and exhausting. Detectives questioned dozens of school principals, head teachers, and social educators for days on end. They retrieved personal files, studied lists of difficult students on record for truancy, fights, or petty thefts. Every name, every surname that aroused even the slightest suspicion was checked. But all was in vain. Days passed, and the checks yielded absolutely nothing. None of the teachers interviewed could point to students capable of such cruelty. All at-risk teenagers had alibis or simply did not fit the psychological profile. The enormous police machine was running idle. A week after receiving the sole clue, the investigators convened to analyze the results. The initial enthusiasm was replaced by deep disappointment. It became obvious that the clue on which so much hope had been placed had not worked. And the reason lay in its fundamental flaw. The word school was too general, too vague. It could mean anything: a student, a former graduate, a school employee, or even someone living nearby. The circle of potential suspects was so wide that effective follow-up simply became impossible. The police had spent enormous resources, but in the end, they had not moved an inch. The investigation had officially reached a dead end. When there are no fresh leads, no new evidence, and the only clue turns out to be useless, experienced detectives do what they have always done. They return to the archives. In the quiet of their offices, they begin to sort through old, dusty folders again, hoping to find a similar pattern, a familiar name, any thread that might have been overlooked years ago. And it was there, among dozens of cases of petty thefts and domestic disputes, that one name surfaced: Peter Kral. For the investigators, this name was like a breath of fresh air. Peter Kral was an old acquaintance, previously convicted of a series of thefts, and his specialty was precisely lonely pensioners. He was the ideal candidate for that very first theory that the police had abandoned after receiving the clue about the school. His profile was simple and clear: a drug addict who constantly needed money for a fix. The motive: obvious. the methods, known. It seemed that the investigation, after a huge detour, had returned to the most logical and simple solution. That same day, Petr Král was declared wanted as the prime suspect in the serial attacks case. His photograph and wanted posters were circulated to all patrol cars in the city. They didn't have to wait long. Just 2 days later, a regular patrol spotted him on an inconspicuous street on the outskirts of Plzeň. The arrest went quickly and without much fuss. Král was taken to central headquarters for interrogation. As he was led down the corridor, many officers looked at him with relief. It seemed that the nightmare that had gripped the city for weeks was finally over. He sat in the interrogation room as the main accused in the case that had already been dubbed the Plzeň Monster case. The interrogation began standardly. The investigator laid out the facts, dates, addresses. Petr Král listened silently without surprise, like a man accustomed to dealing with the police. And when asked directly about his involvement, he calmly declared his complete innocence. This was expected. Every criminal begins with denial. But then Král did something unexpected. He said he had an alibi. And not just the words of acquaintances, but official documents confirming that at the time of the second and third attacks, he could not physically have been in Plzeň. He was in a drug rehabilitation center in another city. The investigators immediately sent a request to the indicated clinic. The answer came within an hour and completely shattered their entire theory. The staff and documents of the rehabilitation center 100% confirmed Král's words. His alibi was ironclad. The most ideal and logical suspect turned out to be innocent. This line of investigation was officially closed. The investigation did not just return to square one. After the time spent and the false hopes, it found itself in an even deeper dead end than before. The false lead and the failure with the school clue cost the police precious time and resources. But in criminology, it often happens that the most high-profile cases are solved not as a result of brilliant insights in offices, but thanks to chance and the vigilance of ordinary people. And this is exactly what happened on October 25, 2004. A call came into the Plzeň police station, one of hundreds that day, which initially did not attract much attention. The caller was the owner of a small pawn shop located in the very center of the city on the bustling Prešovská Street. He said that he was following standard instructions to report any suspicious clients or items. According to him, shortly before the call, a young man had come to him and offered to buy an old military medal. The item itself was not unique, but the seller and his behavior made him uneasy. The pawnshop owner was an experienced man and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Therefore, after completing the transaction, he decided to inform the police just in case. The call was transferred to an operative from the investigative team dealing with the serial attacks. The detective, tired of endless dead ends, without much hope, asked the pawnshop owner to describe the medal in detail over the phone. The man began to list characteristic scuffs, an engraving with the year, a special ribbon color, and at that moment silence fell on the other end of the line. The investigator checked this description against the list of items stolen from the last victim's house. And then, a 100% match. It was one of the commemorative medals of the deceased woman's husband, who was attacked on October 21st. For the first time, the investigation had not a theory, not a guess, but a real, physical thread that led from the crime scene to a specific person. The tone of the conversation changed instantly. "Describe him," the investigator almost ordered. And the first words of the pawnshop owner made the detective's heart beat faster. "It was a teenager," he said. "Looked about 16, maybe a little older. He was very nervous and looked scared." The school version suddenly became central again. The pawnshop owner, possessing an excellent visual memory, gave the investigator a precise and detailed description. Fair hair, a simple haircut, slender build, frightened eyes, and an inexpensive dark jacket. This was more than enough. The owner was immediately asked to come to the station. That same evening, working with a staff artist, he helped create a composite sketch. The faceless phantom terrorizing the elderly of Plzeň finally acquired concrete, recognizable features. The investigation had a face. This composite sketch, compiled from the words of the pawnshop owner, became the main and only hope of the police. That same evening, it was duplicated and distributed to all district police departments in Plzeň with one simple task: to identify the teenager depicted in it. The answer came much faster than anyone expected. The very next morning, the local police officer from the Bori housing estate called the investigation headquarters. He almost immediately and without any doubt recognized the boy in the composite sketch as 16-year-old Marek Svoboda, living in his territory. It seemed like the end. But when the investigators received Marek's initial profile, they were completely bewildered. The information in the folder completely contradicted the image of the cruel criminal they were looking for. Marek Svoboda was the complete opposite of their profile. He grew up in a complete, absolutely prosperous family. At school, he was well regarded. A quiet, diligent student who never had problems with either studies or discipline. In all his 16 years, he had never come to the attention of the police even for the smallest offenses. This was the portrait of an ideal son, not a cold-blooded serial killer. Despite this glaring inconsistency, the medal clue was too serious to ignore. On October 26, 2004, the operational group, having obtained a warrant, went for the arrest. There was no apartment storm or dramatic chase. Everything happened as routinely as possible, which only added to the surrealism of the situation. Marek Svoboda was met on the street as he, like hundreds of other teenagers, was walking home after school. He did not try to run, nor did he resist. He was taken to headquarters for initial questioning, and it was here that his behavior became truly strange. Marek maintained absolute silence. He did not cry, did not get angry, did not protest. He showed no emotions at all, just sat on the chair and stared blankly ahead. Such a reaction stumped the experienced investigators. Marek's behavior did not match the profile of a guilty person, nor the reaction of an innocently accused person. He was as if not there. In addition, the detectives understood how weak their evidence was. In essence, they only had the identification by the pawnshop owner, which linked Marek to the stolen item, but not to the attack itself. This was critically insufficient to press charges for a series of brutal crimes. The investigation faced a new, most important task: to find direct and irrefutable evidence that would confirm Marek Svoboda's presence at the scene of the last crime. While Marek Svoboda remained silent in the interrogation room, investigators knew that the clock was ticking. Without direct evidence or a confession, the case against the ideal student could fall apart in court. The only way out was to go back to the very beginning. At the investigative department, all materials collected at the last crime scene were laid out on tables again. Hundreds of photographs, reports, diagrams, every sealed bag of evidence. They were looking for something that, in the haste of the first hours, they might have considered insignificant. And one of the bags caught their attention. It contained fragments of a small ceramic vase, found a few centimeters from the victim's body. During the initial inspection, they were simply recorded in the protocol as part of the general destruction. But now, with a specific suspect, these fragments took on a completely new meaning. What if, at the moment of the attack, the victim or the attacker touched this vase? What if a trace remained on it? It was a fleeting chance, but it had to be seized. That same night, a repeated, more in-depth fingerprint examination of every, even the smallest fragment was scheduled. The action moved from the noisy offices of the investigators to the sterile silence of the forensic laboratory. An expert in a white coat armed with tweezers and special tools began work. It was a long and painstaking process, like looking for a needle in a haystack. One by one, the fragments were carefully treated with a special magnetic powder which was supposed to reveal hidden traces. The first fragment, empty. The second, only an illegible smudged trace. The third, fourth, fifth, nothing that could serve as evidence. Hours passed and hope melted with each empty fragment. And then, as the expert was finishing work with the last handful of fragments, on one of the smallest pieces of ceramic, the powder suddenly revealed a clear, perfectly preserved fragment of a fingerprint. The lab instantly sprang to life. The discovered trace was immediately digitized and uploaded to the computer database for comparison. On one screen appeared the print from the vase shard. On the other, the fingerprints taken just a few hours earlier from the detained Marek Svoboda. The program began an automatic analysis. The tension reached its peak, and a few seconds later the result appeared on the screen. The computer analysis showed a complete match on 12 unique points, more than enough for 100% identification. The official expert conclusion was short and left no doubt. The fingerprint on the vase shard from the crime scene belonged to Marek Svoboda. The investigation finally had its irrefutable evidence. It seemed the case was solved. But when the investigator entered the interrogation room and placed the official expert conclusion before Marek Svoboda, nothing changed. The teenager looked at the document proving his presence at the crime scene and once again stared blankly ahead. He continued to remain silent. This strange, apathetic behavior completely contradicted the gravity of the evidence. To understand what was going on in the suspect's head, they decided to officially involve one of the country's best forensic psychologists in the case. His task was simple: to observe Marek, analyze his behavior, and compile a detailed psychological profile. The expert spent several hours with Marek, not asking direct questions about the murders, but simply talking to him about abstract topics, observing his reactions, body language, and intonations. And the conclusions he presented in his report came as yet another shock to the investigation. The very first line of the report completely refuted all their assumptions. The subject's behavior, the psychologist wrote, is not a sign of cold-bloodedness, calculating intent, or innate sociopathy characteristic of lone serial killers. The psychologist asserted that Marek's apparent detachment concealed something entirely different. His silence and complete lack of emotion were not the mask of a cruel monster, but a defense mechanism, the result of extreme external psychological pressure or even a pathological fear of someone or something. After reviewing all the case materials, Marek's profile, and comparing this with his observations, the expert put forward the main, shocking hypothesis that completely changed the entire picture of the crime. The psychologist's conclusion was unequivocal. Marek Svoboda, with a high degree of probability, did not act alone. He had a partner who dominated, suppressed, and controlled him. This conclusion landed on the investigative team leader's desk and had the effect of a bombshell. The second-person hypothesis suddenly explained all the inconsistencies and oddities of this case. The irrational cruelty, which was uncharacteristic of a teenager like Marek, and his strange behavior during interrogations. It became clear that they had only arrested the perpetrator, a docile instrument in someone else's hands. That same day, the main version of the investigation was changed. The case was now classified as a crime committed by a group of persons in collusion. The police faced a new task: to make Marek Svoboda speak and name his accomplice. The interrogation tactics were completely changed. The investigator re-entered the room, but this time he carried 2 folders. He silently sat opposite Marek and placed the first on the table, the official conclusion of the dactyloscopic examination. Then he opened the second folder. It was the report of the forensic psychologist. Without raising his voice, the investigator began to slowly and clearly read Marek the expert's key conclusion: that his behavior was the result of fear, that he acted under severe pressure, and that he most likely had a dominant partner. Finishing reading, the investigator looked directly into the teenager's eyes. For the first time, he asked no questions. He made a direct offer. He told Marek that he had a choice: to continue to remain silent and take all the blame for these brutal crimes himself, or to tell everything as it really happened and explain who was with him on those days. Who forced him to do it? A heavy silence hung in the room. Marek Svoboda remained silent for a very long time. The interrogation protocol would record a pause of almost 7 minutes. The investigator did not rush him, giving him the opportunity to make a decision on which his entire life now depended. And in that silence, something broke. For the first time during all the interrogations, the teenager's stony face wavered. He lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. The protocol would dryly record. The suspect began to cry. This was the climax. The wall of silence he had built for so long collapsed. He raised his tear-filled eyes to the investigator and uttered just 3 words that had been awaited for so long. "I'll tell everything." The investigator turned on the dictaphone. The tension in the room was palpable. He asked the main question that this long and agonizing investigation had been leading to: "Who was with you?" Marek fell silent for a few seconds, gathering his thoughts, and then quietly replied that he was not alone in those houses. With him was his best friend. The investigator demanded a name, and Marek gave it. Jakub Novak, 17 years old. From this moment, the main antagonist appeared in the case. The name Jakub Novak, uttered in the quiet of the interrogation room, immediately launched a new phase of the police operation. While one group of investigators continued to work with Marek, another began urgent data collection on the new suspect. Requests were immediately sent to the school where both teenagers studied, to social services, and to the juvenile affairs department. Answers began to arrive within an hour, and they painted a portrait that was the complete opposite of Marek Svoboda. Jakub's report card from the very same school was damning. Teachers described him as a brazen, conflict-prone, and uncontrollable student. He had a reputation as an informal leader, around whom other teenagers always gathered, and was prone to resolving any issues by force. Social services completed the picture. Jakub grew up in a single-parent family which had long been on their records as dysfunctional. In the past 2 years, he had been brought to the police several times for petty shoplifting and involvement in street fights. If Marek was a good boy from a prosperous world, Jakub was his dark reflection. Based on this data, the police no longer had any doubts. On the evening of October 26th, the same day Marek was apprehended, an operational group set out to arrest Jakub Novak. He was taken into custody at the apartment where he lived with his mother. Unlike Marek's passive and frightened reaction, Jakub behaved defiantly. He categorically denied everything, shouted that it was some kind of mistake, and even tried to threaten the police officers. While he was being placed in the car, a search had already begun in his room, and very soon, the investigators found what they were looking for. In the drawer of his desk, among his personal belongings, they discovered an old men's wristwatch and a woman's brooch. Experts would later confirm these items were stolen from the homes of the first and second victims. Now the investigation had a complete picture. On the chief's desk lay 2 psychological profiles, 2 cases, 2 fates. On one side, the impressionable, quiet, good boy Marek Svoboda. On the other, the dominant, aggressive bad boy Jakub Novak. At the same time, Marek, who had already begun to give detailed testimony, confirmed what the investigators had already suspected. He stated that all decisions, whom to choose, how to break into the house, what to do next, were made exclusively by Jakub. The official version of the investigation was finally formed and became the basis for future charges. Jakub Novak was the organizer and ideologue of the criminal group. Marek Svoboda was the perpetrator, who was completely under his psychological influence. When the hierarchy of the criminal pair became clear, investigators needed to reconstruct the events in the smallest, most gruesome details. Now that Marek Svoboda had started talking, there was no stopping him. A flood of terrible memories poured out. The investigator asked him to describe in detail, step by step, exactly how they carried out their attacks, starting from the very first day. And Marek's story revealed the shocking, cynical banality of their actions. Everything started, according to him, as simply as possible. In the afternoon, after school, they would meet in their residential area of Bori. They would take the regular city bus number 30 and ride for about 20 minutes to the Sloveny district, a quiet place with private houses where many pensioners lived. They would get off at a random stop and simply walk down the street. The choice of victim, as Marek confirmed, was absolutely spontaneous. Jacub randomly chose a house he liked. They would approach the door, knock, and when it was opened, politely ask for a glass of water. If a middle-aged person appeared at the threshold or it was clear that someone else was in the house, they would simply thank them and leave. But if the door was opened by a lonely elderly person, Jacub would give a signal and they would rush inside. At this point in the interrogation, the investigator asked the most important question: who inflicted the blows? Marek fell silent and then quietly replied. His words, recorded in the protocol, sound like a horror movie script. Jacub, Marek said. Jacub hit first. He told me that I had to hit too, otherwise I was a coward. He laughed. He laughed when they fell and cried. Marek also confirmed the psychologist's guess. Jacub was almost not interested in money or valuables. He was fascinated by the process itself. The process of humiliation, destruction, and absolute power over a defenseless person. He broke furniture and tore up photographs simply because he enjoyed it. But the most shocking part of Marek's testimony was what happened next. The investigator asked, "What did you do after you left the house?" The teenager's answer showed the full depth of their moral degradation. "Nothing," Marek replied. "We just went to the bus stop, took the same number 30 bus, and rode back to our district." With the meager change stolen from the victims, and we're talking about very small sums that the elderly kept for small expenses, they would get off near their home and buy soda and chips at the nearest kiosk, as if nothing had happened, as if they had just returned from a regular walk. Marek's testimony was shocking, but it was just words. Jakub Novak, in his interrogations, continued to deny everything, behaved aggressively, and insisted on his complete innocence. To break his resistance, the investigation resorted to a standard but very effective step: a confrontation. In one room, face to face, two teenagers were to meet: the broken and remorseful perpetrator and the defiant, self-assured organizer. When they were led into the office, Jakub Novak looked directly at Marek and, with a sneer, stated that he saw this guy for the first time in his life and that all his words were a blatant lie. But the investigators expected such a reaction. They turned to Marek, and he, without lifting his eyes to his former friend, in a quiet but firm voice, fully confirmed all his previous testimony. The psychological pressure did not work. Then the investigator turned to physical evidence. He placed a bag containing the watch and brooch found in Jakub's room on the table before him. Jakub did not even flinch. He stated that he had no idea how these items were connected to any crimes, and that he had simply bought them a couple of weeks ago at a regular flea market. The explanation was weak, but difficult to refute. And then the investigator used his trump card. He picked up Marek's interrogation protocol from the table and began to slowly, in the minutest detail, read out the description of the interiors of all three victims' apartments. The arrangement of furniture, the color of the wallpaper, details that only someone who had been inside could know. Finishing reading, the investigator looked at Jacub. He asked him a simple trap question: to which there could be no logical answer. If you don't know Marek Svoboda and have never communicated with him, how does he know all these details? Details that were never published in the press and were known only to the investigation and the perpetrator. Silence hung in the room. Jakub Novak's aggressive confidence vanished. He remained silent. The investigator repeated the question, but Jakub refused to answer. His defense, built on complete denial, collapsed in an instant. He realized he had been caught. The investigation concluded that the totality of Marek's detailed testimony, physical evidence, and Jakub's failure at the confrontation was more than sufficient. The evidence was fully formed for the case to be submitted to court. The investigation, which lasted several weeks, came to its logical conclusion. Investigators and the prosecutor proceeded to the final stage, preparing the final materials for transferring the case to court. Every action, every piece of evidence, and every word spoken during interrogations now acquired a strict legal form. Jakub Novak's actions were qualified under the most severe article: murder of 2 or more persons, committed with particular cruelty out of hooligan motives. In turn, Marek Svoboda's actions, taking into account his confession and role in the Apache crimes, were qualified as complicity in murder. In parallel with the legal assessment, psychologists gave a final conclusion on the motives of each teenager. Jakub's motive was defined as a sadistic thirst for power and humiliation, born out of hatred for the surrounding world and complete indifference in his own family. Robbery was merely a pretext. The true goal was to inflict pain. Marek's motive was much more complex. Experts defined it as a pathological dependence on the leader's opinion, a panic fear of rejection and inherent weak-willedness. The case represented a classic and at the same time terrifying instance of a criminal tandem: a sadistic organizer and a submissive, obedient perpetrator. When the charges were officially filed, they struck not only the teenagers themselves but also their families. Marek Svoboda's parents refused to believe in their son's guilt until the very end. They hired an expensive lawyer who built the entire defense line on the premise that Marek acted under complete psychological subjugation and was not aware of his actions. The reaction of Jakub's family was completely different. His mother, who had long suffered from alcohol addiction, practically did not participate in the process. She rarely appeared at interrogations and hearings, being in a state of almost constant intoxication. Thus, 2 families, 2 completely different social poles, were tragically linked by one brutal crime. One gave birth to evil, the other could not protect from it. The trial began, and one of its key stages was the investigative experiment, a procedure during which the accused must reconstruct the events of the crime on site. This was a chance for the court and the investigation to see everything not on paper, but in reality. One day, Marek Svoboda, handcuffed, was brought to that quiet Slovani district. Surrounded by a convoy and investigators, he looked detached and moved almost mechanically, without any visible emotions. He calmly pointed out the bus stop where he and Jacub got off, and then led the group along the streets they walked in search of a victim. The procession stopped in front of one of the houses. It was the house of the last victim. The investigator asked why they chose this particular one. Marek looked at the porch and uttered a phrase that sent shivers down everyone present's spines. Jacub said, "This one." In this simple phrase lay the entire horror of what happened, the randomness of the choice, and the absolute power of one teenager over another. The reconstruction then continued at the house door. Using a police officer as a stand-in, Marek demonstrated how they knocked and how Jacub asked for water. He meticulously recreated the first seconds of the attack, explaining, "When the door slightly opened, Jacub simply pushed it open and burst inside." Every step, every turn, every action that Marek demonstrated on site perfectly matched what he had told weeks earlier in the quiet of the interrogation room. The investigative experiment fully confirmed all the details of his shocking confession. At the end of the reconstruction, Marek showed how they left the house and which way they went back to the same bus stop, completing the circle of their criminal route. The investigator asked what they talked about on the way. Marek's answer was another stroke to the portrait of their monstrous reality. He said they discussed some school matters, it seemed, an upcoming test. This day, which included a brutal attack and the destruction of a human life, was just another episode for them. The reconstruction proved the most terrifying thing. For these teenagers, everything that happened was just an event, no more important than a bus ride or homework. The investigative experiment left the court with no doubt about the truthfulness of Marek's testimony. It became finally clear that this case was not just a tragic incident, but a series of cold-blooded and methodical crimes. On June 10th, 2005, a trial began in Plzeň that attracted nationwide attention. In the dock sat two teenagers, two former friends. Their behavior in court differed as sharply as their roles in this story. Jakub Novak behaved defiantly throughout all the sessions, refused to testify, and remained silent. Marek Svoboda, on the contrary, fully admitted his guilt, answered all questions from the court and the prosecutor, once again confirming everything he had said during the investigation. The prosecution methodically, step by step, built its case. The prosecutor presented the court with all the evidence collected during the investigation. The conclusion on Marek's fingerprints on the vase shard, the watch and brooch found in Jakub's room, Marek's detailed confession, and finally, the video. Recording of the investigative experiment, which vividly demonstrated each of their actions. There was no doubt about the guilt of both defendants. After the deliberation of the parties, the court retired to deliver the verdict. In the tense silence of the hall sat all participants of this tragedy, the few relatives of the deceased elderly and the parents of the two teenagers whose lives were destroyed. The announcement of the verdict was scheduled for August 20th, 2005. On this day, the case was to be closed. The judge began with the main accused. Jakub Novak was found guilty on all counts of organizing 3 attacks, 2 murders, and 1 attempted murder, committed with extreme cruelty. Considering all circumstances, the court sentenced him to the maximum punishment for a minor at that time. The sentence: 10 years of imprisonment in a juvenile correctional facility. Then the judge announced the verdict for the second defendant. Marek Svoboda was also found guilty, but the court took into account his sincere confession and active cooperation with the investigation, which helped uncover the entire chain of crimes. He was sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment in an educational colony. The verdicts were delivered and the trial, which brought an end to this terrible story, concluded. But its echo resonated for a long time in the lives of those it touched. The Svoboda family could not bear the public shame. Immediately after the announcement of the verdict, they sold their apartment in Plzeň, moved to another city, and changed their surname, trying to erase this black page from their biography forever. The fate of the Novak family was no less tragic. After the trial, Jakub's mother, who never coped with her addiction, was deprived of parental rights over her younger children. The case itself caused widespread public outcry. The authorities of the city of Plzeň were forced to admit the existence of problems, and in subsequent years, social programs for working with difficult teenagers and monitoring troubled families were significantly strengthened in the city. From a legal point of view, the case was completely closed. The criminals were identified, their guilt was irrefutably proven, and the sentences were handed down and executed. But one, the most important question, remained unanswered. Jakub Novak, the organizer and ideologist of these crimes, never confessed during the entire investigation and trial and never tried to explain his motives. It remained unclear whether he had the intention to cause maximum harm from the very beginning, or whether the excessive cruelty grew spontaneously from case to case, intoxicating him with a sense of impunity. Only one person knows the answer to this question: Jakub Novak himself. But he took this secret with him. He fully served his 10-year sentence and was released. His further fate is unknown. His traces are lost. The case of the two teenagers from Plzen has long been archived, but the question of the root cause of their cruelty, of how monsters awakened in a quiet boy from a good family and his charismatic friend from a troubled one, remains open. May 25th, 2005. During the questioning of the Almeida family's neighbors, the police stumble upon an unexpected statement. One of them, an old man named João, recounts that around the 15th of May at 1 o'clock in the morning, he noticed strange smoke coming from that family's garden. The smoke was thick, and the smell was so pungent that he could even smell it through the window. Not just a bonfire smell, but something chemical, as if something unnatural was burning. And that wasn't the only strange thing. And besides, it wasn't just smoke, he continues, glancing towards the property. That was some kind of unusual heat, as if someone was trying to burn something, but not in fire, but in smoke. I even thought there was something wrong with them. The investigator notes all these words and decides to inspect the premises. He goes into the garden and immediately notices a strange sight. Freshly dug earth in the back corner. As if someone had been in a hurry, literally ripped out a piece of earth and quickly covered it back up. But something is wrong here. It hadn't rained, and the smell that lingered in the air clearly did not come from freshly dug earth. Something is hidden in this part of the garden. Against the backdrop of these doubtful facts, the investigator decides to act. He obtains a search warrant for excavations. Everything points to one thing. Something is hidden under this patch of earth. And if it's not just rubbish, then what? Under this patch of earth could have been anything. Rubbish, ash, after gardening. But why did this particular garden arouse interest? Because the Almeidas had no reason for oddities. On paper, everything was smooth. The family was visible. Their property was exemplary, not problematic. First, the facts. Certificate from the town hall. Farm ownership, 5 generations. The property is registered to João Almeida, 45 years old, a local resident with no debts or penalties. He is registered as a member of the municipal council. Attendance at meetings, stable, no complaints. Participation in the agricultural cooperative, note, active. Inés Almeida, 42 years old, housewife. In the church donation book, her name appears next to holiday dates. Neighbors describe the house as quiet. The yard is closed off with simple metal gates. Access, clean, without traces of constant machinery. Everything looks routine. The household documents say the same. Electricity contract without delays. Water bill, moderate consumption, typical for a family living there all year round. João's van, old but well maintained, MOT passed on time. Regarding fertilizer stock, only the basic assortment. Saltpeter, lime, nothing that would require special permission. In the shed, tools that every farmer has, spades, hoes, saw, axe. No signs of unusual purchases in recent months. The characteristic from the school solidifies the image of the normal world. The son, Tiago, 16 years old, studies well, plays for the school football team. No conflicts with teachers. The girl Sofia, 8 years old, attends primary school. At meetings, Inés always sits in the first row. Exemplary family. Always participates in school life, so reads the director's quote at the top of the characteristic. Photos from the school fair. Inés at the table with homemade cookies. João in the parking lot, regulating parents' cars. Certificate of participation in the village fair, the same names. Where they need to be, the Almeidas appear on time. Even small details fit together to the same conclusion. On the front door, the postman's schedule neatly copied by Inez. At the kitchen window, checked fly screens. In the evening, dim lights in the house. No visits from strangers. No nocturnal outings. According to members of the local church, they always sit in the same place on Sundays, to the left of the aisle, third pew. This is what all sources that usually indicate stability say: school, community, cooperative, municipal services, the family, like a standard from the manual. Why is this important? Because precisely this paper perfectness makes any outlier on the chart stand out. If everything is even in one place, a strange detail catches the eye more strongly. Strange smell in May. That's no longer rubbish. That's an event that doesn't fit into any of their usual routines. People who live so regulated lives love order. They rarely have nocturnal bonfires. And they certainly don't hide freshly dug earth under roses the next day. One more line is added to the picture, no longer from characteristics but from the duty log. 18th of May, 2005. The Almeida family files a missing person report for Sofia. Wording standard. It states that she left in the morning and did not return in the evening. João and Inez answer calmly, without haste. A note is filed at the school. Absent, without good reason. The district police officer makes a note of the conversation. On the property. Order. In the back corner of the garden, new rose bushes are planted. This is documented as beautification. At that time, it raises no suspicion. Thus, the normal world is created, compiled from certificates and diagrams. House without debts, parents without conflicts, children in school, reputation impeccable. Everything looks even until that May break appears. Report on the 18th and neighbor's story about nocturnal smoke a few days prior. The perfect construction gets a crack. From this moment, the standard check turns into an investigation. First, repeated conversations, then rounds among neighbors, and only then, that look at the back corner of the garden, where under the roses, the earth lies unusually even. Even earth under roses. That comes later. The official story begins earlier. 18th of May, 2005, 11 o'clock police station entrance. On the threshold, João and Inez Almeida. Their report is registered as protocol number 23A. Wording, neat without superfluous words. Our daughter, Sofia Almeida, 8 years old, has run away from home. Presumably on the night of the 17th of May. Reason unknown. Both signatures are there. Different handwriting, straight lines. The excerpt from the protocol fields looks typical. Date and time of acceptance, 18th of May, 2005, 11 o'clock. Applicants, Almeida couple, permanent residence. Circumstances, absence of daughter noted during bedroom check on the morning of the 18th of May. Window and front door closed. No signs of forced entry. No notes. Presumed reason for departure, unknown. Possible directions, not specified. Additionally, a current photo from the school file is attached, in the family condition column, without conflicts, handwritten. Noted. Prosperous home. The tone of the conversation remains calm. João speaks briefly, answers in turn. Inez confirms, nods, sometimes corrects the wording. They note that they discovered the absence in the morning, around 7 o'clock. Searched the house, the yard, did not ask neighbors, to avoid making a fuss. Did not call the school, still too early. To the clarifying question about nocturnal noises, both answer the same. Silence. It is stated that the bedroom is tidy. The bed is smooth, shoes are in place in the hallway. No signs of packing belongings, no news from acquaintances. After registration, the standard procedure is initiated. Case of the disappearance of a minor commenced. This is a formula, but behind it are concrete steps. The search goes to departments in the district. Hospitals are checked, bus station, the small train station on the outskirts. The district police officer outlines the first route: house, way to school, shop at the crossroads, wasteland behind the workshop. In parallel, the first inspection of the house is arranged. Windows, doors, yard, outbuildings. Without incident, according to instructions. In the local cooperative, the guard is warned. If he sees the girl, call immediately. On paper, everything looks like ordinary morning commotion. Clear lines, correct columns, notes in the margin. Family without hysteria, neat explanations. They cannot give the reason for departure. This is how every similar case starts, with formal formulations and initial search circles. But precisely here, the discrepancy appears that later becomes central. Report of running away dated 18th of May and neighbor's story about nocturnal smoke a few days earlier. These two lines do not align. Further, checking every step, repeated conversations, and then return to the property, to that back corner of the garden where the roses are planted too evenly. Before touching the earth under the roses, the investigator takes a fundamental step. Repeated conversation with the parents. First question, how they describe Sofia. The answers match in meaning and tone. João says briefly, "She was a difficult child." Ines nods. "She had a complicated character." The explanations sound general. Could feel offended without reason. Withdrew. Argued. To the question of whether there were runaways, no, but could. Intonations even. Pauses neat, hands on knees, fingers intertwined, neither haste nor urgency. Next, comparison with what is verifiable. An official request goes to the school. A characteristic arrives, written without emotion. Sofia Almeida, quiet, calm student, persistent with tasks. No conflicts with classmates and teachers. In the journal, stable grades. No absences until the 17th of May. Remarks on behavior are absent. The class teacher adds everyday details. Draws during breaks. Does not refuse to participate in morning celebrations. In clubs. Drawing on Wednesdays. The sports teacher makes a note. Exempt from some exercises according to medical certificate. Conflicts. None. In the school hallway on the board, photo from the fair. Sofia at the table with handicrafts, classmates next to her. All this fits the earlier image of the normal world, not the thesis, difficult child. The investigator notes another detail, no longer in papers but in the behavior of the applicants. Parents' behavior calm, detached. Emotional reaction to the child's disappearance absent. This is a record in the service report. It is dry, but striking. Ines speaks softly, looks at the table. João answers quickly, without clarifying questions to the police officer. They do not ask who will lead the search, when they will start checking bus stops and forest strips, how they will organize volunteers. They do not describe the daughter's usual routes. Do not insist on an immediate neighborhood round. Their speech is precise, but without personal details. Order in the rooms of the house, shoes lined up in the hallway, no cups of yesterday's tea in the kitchen, dry cleanliness and correct phrases. In parallel, the district police officer collects first reactions. Neighbors speak of a quiet family. Conflicts were not visible. No one saw the girl leaving alone late at night. On the street near the shop, no camera, it's the outskirts. Buses run rarely in the morning. Drivers remembered no one. This means that external confirmations of unauthorized departure are so far absent. The image of the difficult child persists only through the parents' words. The papers do not second it. Thus the first evidence appears. Not an exhibit and not numbers, but a discrepancy between official words and verifiable reality. The description of the complicated character does not match the characteristic from the school. The lack of emotion does not match the moment when the missing person report was filed. This is not yet proof, but already a reason to adjust the perspective. The family moves from the victims column to the list of those whose words must be checked line by line. Next, the modus operandi changes. Instead of broad field combing, a closer look at the house and yard, repeated inspection of the rooms, window panes, front door, fixation of smells and traces in outbuildings, comparison of time on the telephone in the hallway and on the old alarm clock by Sophia's bed. And then, return to the property, to where new roses are planted and the earth lies too evenly. Precisely there, the investigation gets the chance to move from words to material traces. Precisely there, the investigation gets the chance to move from words to material traces. But before touching the earth, the investigator records the family's behavior. Why are they so calm about an official disappearance? From this moment, the focus shifts to the parents. A simple line appears in the report. Parents do not participate in the search. Do not call friends and acquaintances. Do not put up notices. Phone log empty. No serial calls to the school. Not to neighbors. The duty officer notes, do not ask questions about the search progress. In the evening, when volunteers gather at the shop, João and Inés do not come. The yard is closed. Lights in the house dim. On the 20th of May, Inés is noticed at the garden center on the street. The cashier remembers the purchase. Spade, gloves, bags of earth, 2 rose saplings, packs of fertilizer, payment, cash. Purchase for beautification 2 days after the missing person report. On the 21st of May, the neighbor says she saw gardening work on the property. Calm pace, without haste. Empty bags are also carried there, neatly stacked by the shed. On the 22nd of May, João is present at the municipal council meeting. In the protocol, usual questions: irrigation, road to the farm, fuel distribution for the cooperative. Noted as present, voted. No exemption. No comments on family circumstances. On the same day, quiet at the house. Volunteers continue their rounds, but the homeowners do not come out to them. No printed flyers at the gate. Order in the Almeida kitchen. Calendar on the wall. Without notes, search. Without phones, who to call. The words difficult character remain in the shorthand, but the real actions speak of something else. No panic. No attempts to expand the search circle. Instead, there are tool purchases and a return to the meeting schedule. For relatives who are searching, this is atypical. For those trying to maintain the facade of everything under control, logical. At this point, the investigator draws a working conclusion. The applicant's behavior is the first indirect evidence, not an exhibit, but a marker. João and Inés Almeida become unofficial, but primary figures of attention. Further, checking receipts and routes, repeated inspection of the outbuildings, and return to the back corner of the garden where new roses cover a too even layer of earth. The return to the back corner of the garden is postponed by half a day. First, to understand what happened in the family before the disappearance. Requests go through channels to medical facilities. The answer comes from the clinic in Bragança. At the end of April, a visit by the Almeida family was registered there. The excerpt is dry. Date, 28th of April 2005. Patient, Sofia Almeida. Dermatology cabinet. Diagnosis, rare hereditary skin disease. Observation and gentle regimen recommended. Separate line. Conversation with accompanying persons. In the doctor's interrogation protocol number 18B, the phrase later appears, "I mentioned that the pathology is genetic." The father, João Almeida, asked many questions about inheritance, was tense. Clarifications, which analyses confirm whether it is transmitted through the paternal or maternal line, how exactly the source can be determined. The doctor notes, the mother was silent, looked at the floor. The father asked questions quickly, interrupted. This medical thread fits what is already known. In the school card, there is a note about exemption from part of the exercises for health reasons. The dates match. Early May. At the municipal pharmacy, ordinary purchases are registered. Cream, bandages for irritation, without prescription. Nothing urgent. But the fact of the diagnosis stands out from the calm picture where the family is without conflicts and difficult character, only sounds from the parents' mouths. The investigator notes, exactly 3 weeks passed between the medical record of the 28th of April and the report of unauthorized departure on the 18th of May. The doctor talks about genetics. The father focuses on inheritance. In the family's behavior during these days, there are no signs of panic, but rather a strict order of everyday life. At this point, the diagnosis alone proves nothing, but it becomes the central reference point. Precisely around it, versions, motives, and words of the applicants are checked. With this background, running away ceases to look like an independent line. The case shifts to the house, to conversations at the end of April, 2 nights in mid-May, and further, to those roses in the back corner, where a 2-even layer of earth is already awaiting a formal basis for excavation. A solid background is needed for the excavation request. This is provided not only by roses in the back corner. The investigator looks at the second child in the house, Tiago. If everything is quiet in the family, his behavior will show it. If not, it will too. The interrogation is conducted officially in the presence of a psychologist. The protocol dryly records, the teenager sits with slumped shoulders, looking at one point. He answers basic questions monosyllabically. Don't know, don't remember, didn't see. Pauses long, voice quiet. Palms damp, leg trembling under the table. Eyes red, but no traces of recent tears. They try to move on to everyday life. When did you last see your sister? In the evening. What did you talk about? Don't remember. Were there arguments at home? No. To the question of whether he heard anything unusual at night, again, don't know. And a sharp intake of breath. The psychologist asks for a break and offers water. The reaction is consistent. Looking at the table, shoulders even lower. No contact is made. A separate document is the specialist's conclusion. Formulations without evaluations. The subject shows signs of acute stress disorder, stupor, avoidance of topics, panicked reaction to clarifying questions are noted. High probability of intimidation. In the notes, everyday details, sleeps poorly, flinches at loud noises, avoids eye contact with parents. The psychologist recommends a repeated conversation without the family's presence. The repeated conversation will not take place. The parents are categorical. Stress. Leave him alone. They demand to stop the interrogation and invoke the right to protect their son from pressure. Formally, this is permissible. But another line is added to the file. Applicants hinder the minor's cooperation with the specialist. Consequently, the calmness of the adults and Tiago's condition differ as much as their words differ from Sofia's school characteristic. His behavior is more akin to a reaction to severe trauma than ordinary worry about unauthorized departure. For the investigation, this is not proof, but a significant marker. This is enough to accelerate the next stage, obtaining the resolution and returning to the garden, to those roses and the too even layer of earth. The resolution is obtained. Morning of the 26th of May, 2005. Forensics experts arrive at the Almeida family's yard. Tape, tripods, photo fixation. Point, back corner, where roses were recently planted. That's exactly where they put the first spade. What is hidden beneath them will now become clear. They work slowly. Remove the turf layer by layer. At 30 centimeters, a dark, as if after a bonfire, intermediate layer. Smell not like wood. Even deeper, at about 50 centimeters, the spade hits loose ash. The hole is expanded. In the ash, small white fragments, not stone and not lime. The expert leans forward, takes 2 pieces with tweezers, marks the size with a ruler. The preliminary on-site opinion sounds dry. Objects resemble calcined bone fragments. Ash and fragments are packed into bags, numbered. The area is divided into squares. Everything around is sifted through a sieve. More whitish particles remain on the sieves. Next to them, charred pieces of earth and traces of melting, characteristic of high temperature. They fix the contour of the hearth. Depth and distribution of the ash indicate long burning in an excavated pit. This is not a garden bonfire for grass. The formulation, presumably human remains discovered, is entered into the protocol. On site, silence. The roses planted above look like a cover. The layer of fresh earth over the ash is even without natural admixtures. From this minute on, the case changes its status. The report of unauthorized departure becomes part of another picture. Materials go to the laboratory. DNA on bone fragments, chemistry of the ash, search for traces of organic tissues. In parallel, the perimeter is expanded. Shed, tools, fuel storage area. The parents are informed of the procedural decision. The investigation moves from words to facts, and the next point on the route is obvious. Outbuildings where traces of preparation and tools that do not fit into ordinary farm work might have remained. The tools from the shed are sent to the lab along with the contents of the pit. The expertise provides the answer to the main questions. To whom do the fragments belong? And what exactly was burning in the excavated hearth? Report of the Forensic Laboratory number 45E, section, Bone Objects, Material, Human, Condition, Calcined Fragments, Evaluation by Growth Zones, age 7 to 10 years, Sex, Female, DNA analysis performed. Comparison with control sample from Sophia's personal belongings shows 99.9% probability match. Additionally, microsamples were compared with clothing from her room. Result confirmed. Degradation markers correspond to high temperature exposure over several hours. Section Ash and Soil. Elevated concentrations of phosphates, calcium, and products of thermal decomposition of organic tissues found. Charred particles. Melted inclusions are present. Distribution of layers indicates burning in a pit, not a superficial bonfire. Traces of charcoal minimal. Hearth was purposefully created. In the sieve residue, additional whitish fragments, morphologically corresponding to elements of small bones. Section Tools, Shed. On the axe blade and saw blade, microscopic blood traces. Group affiliation matches Sophia's blood group. On the handles, traces of fresh cleaning but microfine brown particles confirmed as blood are preserved in the indentations. Micro traces of soot are fixed on the shed floor. Composition correlates with ash from the pit. Summary conclusion. The fragments discovered in the garden belong to a human female of child age. Genetic comparison indicates Sophia Almeida with 99.9% probability. Ash contains signs of combustion of human organic tissues. Blood traces with matching group were found on tools from the shed. Scientifically fixed, Sophia's body was dismembered and burned on the farm premises. From this moment, the unauthorized departure version is excluded from the working scheme. The investigation moves to another level. Procedural measures against João and Inês, seizure of clothing, checking time windows, and preparation for confrontations. Next point, interrogations, where each of their words will now be compared not with certificates, but with figures from report number 45E. Report number 45E crosses out the unauthorized departure version. The reaction follows immediately. The Almeida family's lawyer makes a statement at the department entrance. Sofia was kidnapped. Criminals killed her and placed the remains in the garden to frame the parents. João adds a detail. There's an old conflict with the neighbor over the property line. This is a new line. It must be checked. The police pick up the pace. The neighbor João points to gives a statement. He spends the evening of the 15th of May with his sister in the town across the pass. The time is fixed by a pharmacy receipt and calls from the home phone. There are 2 witnesses. The route there and back is confirmed. The word alibi enters the protocol. In parallel, they look at gates and locks at the Almeidas. No signs of forced entry. Bolts from the inside. The neighbor does not have his own keys. Yard closed. On the dirt road near the property, no fresh traces of unfamiliar cars for that period. None of the neighbors saw strangers at the gate. Nocturnal activity in the garden was present, but it originated from inside the yard. This is visible from the traces in the direction from the shed to the pit. The abduction version is checked as standard. There is not a single call with demands, neither note nor letters. Family's phone records clean, calls about everyday life, no anonymous connection. At school, among friends, among teachers, no one heard of conflicts that could escalate into revenge. In the vicinity of the nearest streets, there are no cameras, but police posts lack recordings of unfamiliar cars at night on the specified date. The focus returns to the place where they found the ash. The hearth was dug in advance. The burning lasted long. Roses are planted above it. This requires time and access. To plant material into the yard, a stranger would have to enter at night, dig, make a fire, then remove traces and leave in the morning without anyone noticing. Such a scheme finds no confirmations. Neither noise nor headlights, nor movement behind the gates that neighbors could have reported. João repeats about old dispute. But the conflict itself turns out to be on paper, correspondence in the town hall about boundary markers without threats or complaints. Dated last spring. Since then, silence. The neighbor is not on any list, is not involved in crimes, has no debts. His alibi is solid. The defense version holds only through words. Material traces subside. Abduction is not confirmed. Framing is not apparent. There is no external factor that would have led a stranger into the closed yard and to the pit under the roses. Who had constant access to the garden? The family. The attempt to create a false trail fails. The investigation returns to the only working line: actions within the house and yard in mid-May. Further, procedural steps against João and Inês, separate interrogations, and comparison of their minute-by-minute accounts with data from expert reports and purchases. Precisely there, details will begin to diverge that can no longer be covered by general phrases. Precisely there, details cease to hide behind general phrases. The repeated interrogation is conducted separately. They start with Inês. 2 documents are placed on the table: report on remains and a separate folder, results of the genetic kinship test. The question sounds simple. Why was the conversation about heredity so important for the family? Further, only facts. Experts' conclusion: Sofia's DNA matches Inês's profile. With João's profile, not. Wording dry. Biological paternity of João Almeida excluded. Exclusion probability, 99.9%. This explains the April visit to the dermatologist and the tense questions about inheritance. Ines listens, lowers her gaze, asks for water, makes no comments. A new line appears in the protocol. Paternity test results presented. Reaction. Silence. From this moment, the motive is documented. Concealment of an extramarital affair and its consequences. The abduction version loses its meaning. The external enemy disappears. What remains are people with a closed yard, access to the shed, and to the pit under the roses. Further, confrontations and minute-by-minute verification of their accounts with timestamps from expert reports. Precisely there, not only words but also actions will begin to diverge. They are taken to different offices. On each table, a dictaphone, a folder with report number 45E, and the kinship test result. The formulation is clear. Sophia, not João's daughter by bloodline. What will they say when the motive has been laid on the table? They begin with João. The protocol fixes the sequence. Investigator. Sophia is not your daughter. Pause. 8 seconds. João Almeida. That blood is not mine. He has shown photos from the shed and the inventory of findings on the tools. Where did the traces come from? Worked around the house. Where was Sophia on the 15th of May? Silence. The investigator counts the time. 0:40, light in the shed, 1:10, smoke smell at neighbors, 6:20, fresh earth. What was burned? Rubbish. Why at night? More convenient that way. He does not dispute the test results and does not comment on the ash with organic traces. Repeats the same thing. I didn't touch it. That blood is not mine. To the question of who planted the roses, the wife bought them. I helped. In the neighboring office, Ines. She has read the conclusion on the remains and separately, the exclusion of paternity. Investigator. Did you confess the affair to your husband? Ines Almeida. I made a mistake. When did you tell him? Recently. What did you do with your daughter? I had to fix everything. She clarifies. The family. To the question of what fix everything means, silence. Her signature is on the garden center receipt from the 20th of May. What was the inventory for? Garden, spring. Why roses over fresh earth in the back corner? Covered a pit with rubbish. The psychologist notes, no crying, even speech, looking aside. Confrontations create freeze frames. Were you in the house on the night of the 15th? João nods. Did you see your wife? Yes, in the yard. Ines says differently in her shorthand. I went to bed earlier. To the question about the son, both answer the same. Slept. Then they ask not to disturb him. The investigator reminds, earlier they forbade repeated interrogation of Tiago. Motive. Stress. Simultaneous yes is recorded on the dictaphone. There is no direct confession. But phrases that piece together the picture enter the protocol. For João, recognition of the motive-forming factor. That blood is not mine. Agreement with the test result and silence on the key question about the night of the 15th of May. For Ines, I had to fix everything, an inventory purchase directly after the missing person report. Time windows match expert data and neighbor observation. The wall of silence gets cracks, and the spouse's lines cease to align. Further, the course is predictable. The investigation records contradictions, obtains temporary arrest to verify statements, and prepares a new pressure point, returning to the sole witness in the house. Next step, conversation with Tiago without the parents' presence, with protection and a camera. Precisely there, the minute-by-minute chronology of the night of the 15th of May will come together. Next step, conversation with Tiago without parents. Day 27th of May, 2005. The psychologist reports. The teenager is ready to speak. Cabinet, camera, defender next to him. On the table, a dictaphone and a blank protocol form. The parents do not confess, so the truth can be given by the one who was in the house on the night of the 15th. They start with something simple. The first sentence enters the protocol. I was woken by noise. Tiago clarifies the time, around 12:30. First I heard whispering on the stairs, then the creaking of the door to the street. He goes to the window and sees 3 people in the yard. They were standing by the flower beds. The father spoke loudly. I heard, "Foreign blood." The mother cried. Said, "I'll fix everything." He repeats these words twice. The psychologist notes, coherent speech, long pauses, no emotional evaluations. Next, he gives a minute-by-minute picture. They woke Sophia and led her into the yard. The father held her hand. In the garden, he threw her to the ground and pressed her down. She tried to break free. Then she stopped moving. He does not use harsh words. Says, she fell silent. Then, a new detail. The parents picked her up and carried her to the shed. They closed the door from the inside. After a few minutes, a dull thudding and sharp scratching came from the shed. Long. Then it became quiet. Next, property in the back corner. They carried something from the shed to the garden. Several times. There was already a dug pit. Tiago notices the light the neighbor saw. The lamp was on in the shed. In the yard, smoke rose around 1 o'clock. He says he didn't leave the room, was afraid. After that, smelled burnt for a long time. In the morning, according to him, Mom said, "If even one word, it will be worse." The psychologist notes the reaction, stupor, flinching at the word word. The shorthand synchronizes with external data. Time around 1 o'clock overlaps with the neighbor's observation of thick smoke. Description of the finished pit matches excavations. Ash at about 1/2 meter depth and an even layer of earth over it. Mention of light in the shed, with statements from other neighbors about nocturnal activity. Phrases, "foreign blood," and "I'll fix everything," match what João and Inés will later say in interrogations. Route of movements, from the shed to the back corner, corresponds to the trace chain in the soil. At the end of the interrogation, Tiago asks that the parents not be in the hallway. He confirms that he previously kept silent due to threats. "I thought they would send me somewhere," the protocol records. The psychologist recommends ensuring witness protection and prohibiting contact with the parents until the trial. They sign the record. Audio is attached to the interrogation. From this moment, what was missing appears in the case, a direct witness. His words leave abduction no longer a viable version. The picture closes. Motive confirmed by kinship test, actions, by expert reports, chronology, by a voice from the house. Tiago's statements become the key evidence that destroys the last line of defense. Further, the investigation has arrests, minute-by-minute reconstruction of the night, and preparation of the indictment. Precisely to this stage, the case materials will move. The reconstruction of the night is compiled from Tiago's shorthand. It fills gaps and ties every minute to actions in the yard. In the protocol, no emotions, but short phrases. What he saw and heard. Quotes follow one after another. They led Sophia into the garden. Further, without descriptions. The father threw her to the ground. He held his hands on her neck. She did not move. The mother stood next to him. She watched. After that, shift. Then they carried her to the shed. Behind the door, according to Tiago, work began. I heard noises. Blows. Then a saw. Timestamp. Around 1 o'clock. Matches neighbor's remarks about thick smoke. Another quote. In the morning, there was a bonfire in the garden. In the shorthand, there are details confirmed by exhibits. Lamp in the shed was burning. Fresh soot deposits are fixed on the ceiling in the inspection protocol. Pit was dug in advance. Geometry of the hearth and ash distribution show this. Carried several times. A trace chain from the shed to the back corner is traced in the soil. Roses planted later, layer of fresh earth over the ash even without natural inclusions, sapling roots recently cut. Main phrases also match. Foreign blood, for João. I'll fix everything, for Inês. These words already sounded in their interrogations and are now reinforced by the witness's voice. Further, the documentation speaks for itself. Expert conclusion. In the ash, calcined bone fragments by DNA, Sophia. On axe and saw, blood of corresponding group. In the summary report on biology and chemistry, traces of combustion of organic tissues. Separate forensic document fixes cause of death, asphyxia. Formulation direct, without assumptions, based on statements and totality of signs. Tiago's statements fit together with the case materials like a puzzle. Route, house, shed, pit, confirmed. Time windows synchronized with neighbor observation and with inspection data. His words need no clarifications. In them, there are no versions, only sequence of actions. This becomes the exposure that was missing. After adding the shorthand, the investigator obtains procedural measures. João and Inês Almeida are arrested. They are declared suspects. House and outbuildings are sealed. Defense line abduction is closed. External factor is absent. Further, technical stage. Reconstruction of the night of the 15th of May, minute by minute, comparison of receipts, calls, movements, and preparation of that document that sends the case to court. Indictment with full list of evidence and quotes from Tiago's protocol. This document will form the basis of the indictment. Further, official reconstruction of the night of the 15th of May, without versions. Only time, distances, and confirmed actions. 2,200 hours. Yard closed. João and Inês lead Sophia into the garden. Timestamp is taken from Tiago's statements and everyday traces. In the hallway, the clock stopped at 21:58. After winding them, the hands move on. At 22:03, the last entry in the notebook in the kitchen is dated. 2,205 hours. At the back flower beds, resistance suppression occurs. In the forensic summary, the cause of death is stated as asphyxia. This time is reinforced by Tiago's statements and the absence of noise in the house after 22:07 according to the words of neighbors behind the wall. Traces of struggle in the house were not found. 2,215 hours. The lifeless body is carried to the shed. Distance, about 20 meters. In the soil between the house and the shed, a trace chain is uncovered, matching João's footprints by stride. On the door bolt, fresh lubrication marks and microparticles of soot, identical in composition to that from the hearth. 2,230 hours to 1 o'clock. In the shed, acts of concealment are carried out. Tools, saw and axe with blood traces matching Sophia's group. On the handles, traces of fresh cleaning. On the lamp ceiling, soot that settled over a short time. This phase is confirmed by Tiago's statements and the time window of the lighting work. The neighbor opposite saw light around midnight, 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Transport of fragments to the pre-dug pit in the back corner of the garden. Distance, about 30 meters. On the route from the shed to the pit, multiple trace intersections are observed in 2 directions. In the pit itself, a layer of ash and cinders about 50 centimeters deep, containing calcined bone fragments. Ash analysis showed products of thermal decomposition of organic tissues, phosphates, and high calcium concentration. The neighbor records dense smoke around 1 o'clock. This matches the peak of the burning. Traces of adding fresh wood are almost none. The hearth was maintained for a long and even period. 4 o'clock 30. Fire extinguished, pit covered. On top, a fresh layer of earth and rose planting. This stage is confirmed by a receipt from the garden center dated the 20th of May, traces of recent digging, and a uniform backfill horizon without inclusions typical for old soil. At 6 o'clock 20, the neighbor notices order in the yard and the absence of fresh smoke smell. The hearth is already covered. On Inez's clothes, seized during the search, fine earth particles with the same mineral composition as in the layer above the ash. Daylight hours of the 16th to 17th of May pass without calls to neighbors and without calls to the school. The 18th of May at 11 o'clock, a report of unauthorized departure is filed. At this moment, roses are already planted in the yard, a fact recorded by the district police officer as beautification. The chronology of reports does not match the real nocturnal activity on the property. Summary of confirmation. Cause of death, asphyxia, remains belonging to Sophia. Tools, blood traces of the corresponding group. Hearth, burning in the pit for several hours. Movements, traces from the shed to the back corner. Tiago's statements match every key marker: time, place, route, and phrases that were heard that night. Thus the sequence appears as follows: 22 o'clock, led into the garden. 22 o'clock 5, cessation of breathing. 22 o'clock 15, transport to the shed. 22 o'clock 30 to 1 o'clock, concealment of traces in the utility building. 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, cremation in the excavated hearth. 4 o'clock 30, pit masquerade and rose planting. Every element is confirmed by at least 2 sources: expert opinions, observations, purchases, or witness testimonies. The crime is reconstructed down to minutes and meters. House, shed, pit, 3 points on a line. There are no external participants. Access, means, and time, with 2 adults in the house. Materials are collected into a unified package. The next stage is formal, but crucial: case transfer to court, where this chronology will become the basis of the indictment speech and will be reviewed in open session. The verdict provides the answer. April 2006, court in Bragança. In the dock, João and Inês Almeida. Charges: murder under aggravating circumstances and complicity. Basis of evidence: report number 45E, excavation protocol, chronology of movements, Tiago's statements. Experts heard: biologists, criminalists, psychologist. Evidence: phone records, interrogation transcripts examined. The court establishes motive determined by kinship test, actions consistent with expert opinions, chronology confirmed by witnesses. Verdict: guilty. Sentence: João Almeida, life imprisonment. Inês Almeida, life imprisonment. House and utility building, under arrest. Tiago is granted protection and guardianship, legal part closed. Next, consequences. What remained on the farm after the verdict, and how those who saw that May sent live. After the verdict, a practical question remains. What about those who remained, and about the place where everything happened? Answers dry, as in an overview, without emotions, only decisions and data. Tiago Almeida is placed under state guardianship, contact with parents forbidden by court order. A closed rehabilitation course is organized for him. Psychologist, regime, school at the center. Visits, according to schedule, under supervision. Separate line, witness protection program until all procedures are completed. His belongings from the house, by inventory. Family name in open documents is not specified. The Almeida family farm is transferred to state ownership and sold at auction. New owners removed furniture, dismantled the house, and shed. Foundations were removed with an excavator. Plot leveled. The path to the gates was filled with gravel, water and electricity, under new contracts. Old meters dismantled. In place of the yard, an empty space. Garden tilled. Roses that Inez had planted over the covered pit were pulled out. Flower beds replanned. Neither signs nor memorial markers. Physical traces of the Almeida family did not remain on this land. Further, the story has only a paper trail. Case number, protocols, expert opinions, verdict. May sent, in neighbor statements. Roses, in inventory list. Everything else erased down to a level layer, case closed.